So tonight we have Maria Brito. I hope you've had a chance to see her work upstairs. It's installation, it's sculpture, it's painting, it's mixed media, it's a lot of different things, and she'll tell you all about it. She immigrated here as a child, a teenager from Cuba in 1960 and settled in Miami. She has numerous degrees, a bachelor's in engineering.
No.
No. I was like, is that right? What is a BE degree?
Bachelor in art education.
Art education.
A bachelor in fine arts.
A bachelor in fine arts, a master in fine arts, right?
A master in art ed.
And a master in art. Lots of degrees. From the University of Miami and from Florida International University, also in Miami. She has exhibited across the country. Her work is in several public collections, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Huntington Art Gallery, the Miami-Dade College. She's even done a major commission for the Olympic Sculpture Park in Seoul, Korea. She's received the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, which is a major grant, a National Endowment for the Arts Visual Artist Fellowship, and a Florida Arts Council Fellowship. Her work is often autobiographical, but also somewhat universal. It deals with ideas of identity, displacement, immigration, things that we all experience in different ways. So please help me welcome Maria.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone involved in putting together this exhibition. In the following statement about my work in general, I borrow from an article written by art historian and friend for many years, Lynette Bosch. It reads as follows. My work deals with essential and universal existence defined by emotions, sensations, personal memory, psychological situations, knowledge, and perception. The imagery that I use is symbolic of the process of self-discovery, and it is a personal iconographic system developed from my identity as a woman, a mother, a wife, an exiled Cuban, a naturalized American, and a Catholic. Alongside the particular details of my existence, my work is an exploration of the intrinsically universal elements that each aspect of my being represents: gender, family, national and ethnic identity, religion, and beyond religion, the unexplained realities that lie beyond life in the certainty of death. Some of the works that you're going to be seeing are installations, and this last statement describes pretty much the way I feel about these installations. It reads, I think of many of my works as a bracket in our reality, in the reality that we all share, and try to offer the spectator a newly transformed alternative vision of that reality through the experience of sharing my perception. This slide is of a piece, a clay piece, entitled The Real. And even though as a student in the field of art education, which is what I pursued first, I was exposed to different materials and processes, it was a chance encounter with clay as a medium that eventually encouraged me to pursue a career in the visual arts. I was always drawing as a kid, but I never thought I had the creativity. I never thought of myself as becoming an artist. To me, that was something very foreign from what I thought I would be in life. So, in essence, it was through the manipulation and handling of clay that I first realized that I could create an object in which I could see a concrete manifestation of my inner feelings, of my inner self. So clay as a material was the catalyst for my career. The Real is a clay and mixed media work, one of 3 small pieces which were part of my MFA exhibition at the University of Miami. The reason I show this piece, aside from the fact that it's made out of clay, the format, that is the vertical plane intersecting a horizontal plane, as well as the space defined by that intersection, is present in other small clay works I created around this time. And most importantly, it's a format that eventually informed many of my larger works. As I mentioned, the larger installations. Also in that exhibition, that early exhibition, was underneath it all, a large mixed media installation, which in many ways, including the use of found objects and materials, laid the foundation for later works. It was with this piece that I learned how to build a wall. And the space that I was given at the museum was much larger than this. I wanted to narrow it down, and I thought, well, that's impossible. And somebody taught me how to build a wall, and I built a few walls in order to make the piece. Woman before a mirror. Behind the panel, the vertical panel, is a shadow box containing small objects that appear to be floating in space. They're visible through the small area of the plexiglass mirror where I erased the reflective surface. I think of these small objects as fragments of memories trapped in the mirror. The inner surface of the white cabinet in the foreground is lined with a purple velvet-like cloth, and in it are mirrors similar to those hanging from the shelf. The mirrors reflect black and white images of my face. So it's sort of an introspective piece dealing with identity and memory. Come Play With Us, Childhood Memories, is one of a number of pieces that came about when my sons were young and had begun to assert their individuality. The experience prompted me to reflect on my own childhood. There's a detail of, here you see a very restricting crib-like structure. There's a mirror inside, again with a partial view of my face. Certain elements, there's a reproduction of the piece in that small rectangular section that seems to be hanging from a pulley on top. And through that mirror, it's a shadow box behind the panel. It's smaller than, or larger rather than the panel that you saw previously in the other piece. And the small hands that appear to be inviting the child to come into their world. There's also the appearance of vigilance, with those eyes painted onto the wallpaper. So up until that time, I had not been comfortable with the idea of applying color to my works, relying instead on the natural color of the materials I used and a few basic colors. So I decided to try my hand at painting to see what would happen. I didn't plan to show my work. I didn't think anything would happen, but it did. And these are some of a few early paintings that I did. They were acrylic on canvas, which I did during a short period of time. Now, this brief experience eventually led me to the use of applied color as an integral part of my sculptures and installations. After the conquest, you can see an example of my use of applied color, albeit a little bit shy, I guess, on a three-dimensional piece. The following are more recent oil paintings on wood. This is the Juggler, and you can see some art historical references there, Mantegna's angels, or cherubs rather, a self-portrait as a juggler, juggling work juggling the raising of children and a certain enigmatic mask at the bottom. Under clear blue skies, which was done on two separate panels that, when assembled, made up for the painting. You can see again the borrowing of art historical imagery with Giotto's angels in the background. This is Take a Look at My Heart. And while doing these pieces, I had to figure out how to best make them in such a way that they would travel safely. So a piece like this, for instance, is made up of 3 sections. The rectangular panel on the top, which includes the image of an upside down heart with a faucet coming out from it. The vertical piece travels separately. The piece on the bottom with the bucket travels separately, and instructions are sent with the piece so that the person who receives it knows what to do with the 3 sections. This is the Traveler. Again, borrowing from art historical works. The demons around what looks to be my self-portrait there are from the Master of Safra. The figure itself is a Mantegna Christ, and I took the liberty of putting myself there. I thought about it very, being from a Catholic background, I thought about, am I doing the right thing here? And on the hands are 2 portraits of my children, as stigmata. This is self-portrait as a swan. And my sons have been involved with my work from early on, and the hand, for instance, is I photographed one of my son's hands in that position, so they're part of in many ways, part of my work, encouraging me all along. This is Feed, where a young girl is being fed intravenously, and the source, what is being fed, is the idea of sin, represented by the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Madonna dethroned. And appropriations. In a conversation I had with Dr. Juan Martinez, who authored a monograph on my work, and it's interesting that we didn't have that conversation while he was writing the book. He said, Maria, what about all of those images that you borrow from art history? And I said, Juan, I think of them as pretty much as what I do with my installations, with some of the sculpture themselves. I may use a funnel that I buy at the hardware store, so it's, in a way, it's a ready-made, a la Duchamp in a way. So I use objects that are already made, and I guess the context in which I put them, they assume a different interpretation. So is this painting. In this piece, which is a piece that hangs on the wall, which is called Meanderings, I attempted to give form to what takes place during the creative process. I sat down one day in my studio trying to figure out, the creative process is such a beautiful and yet an intangible process. What would happen if I tried to make physical that which happens during that process, and this is what I came up with. The masks are made out of a product that I fell in love with called celluclay, which once it hardens, you can drill through it, you can paint it, as you can see. So this is meanderings. I began to work on The Parting, which is the title of this piece, a year after the death of my father, when my mother sold the house in which we had lived for many years. And this is how it felt to leave our house for the last time. Theory on the annihilation of dreams. I guess it picks up on that sorrow that that one feels when a loved one passes on. This is a detail which is, it appears next to the foot of the bed, the distorted bed, and it's an angel with wings but no arms. I had this piece in my living room for a while, and my older son was scared to death to go get milk in the middle of the night. He still jokes about it. It's called The Garden and the Fruit, and it was inspired by a chance encounter with a former Cuban political prisoner. I met this gentleman just purely by chance, but his physical appearance, he was very thin and toothless, led me to believe that he was an old man. Later I learned that he was in his early 40s. His physical condition was a result of years of incarceration, and I dedicated this piece to him, unbeknownst to him. So it reflects, I guess, a version of tropical vegetation, but very menacing in your look. There's a bed-like structure there where the supposed figure is laying down, and it's tied up. A pillow representing dreams is pierced by one of these very menacing-looking plants, and the plants themselves have eyes painted on them, so as to imply the vigilance that a person under, experiences in a situation like the country where we come from. Introspection Childhood Memories was commissioned by the Olympiad of Art Committee on the occasion of the 1988 Olympics. It is permanently installed in the Olympic Park in Seoul, South Korea. I use corten steel, and aluminum to carry out the work. It represents the present and the past on the other side of the wall. I actually made this piece, I replicated a former piece. I was given about 3 months to complete the work, and it was to be an outdoor work, which I had never done. I had never worked with metal, I had never worked with steel, so I approached this very dear friend who's a master sculptor and welder and did amazing job. He passed on not long ago. And we worked together on the piece in his studio. The piece is about 12 feet in length. And what appears to be wood is all corten steel, which if you know anything about the material, it rusts up to a point, and then it doesn't continue degrading. So it just looks wonderful the way the patina develops. So this side is a present. On the seat of the chair, there's a light switch that activates a light inside the cabinet on the other side. implying that we can, in times of repose, when we are quiet, we can think about the past. This is a detail of the other side. But as you can see, even the floor of the piece appears to be wood, and it's actually corten steel. In self-portrait, the abstracted figure is on a wheelchair over which it has no control. The skid marks on the white platform allude to an impending fall. The section corresponding to the head of the figure depicts a house going up in flames. I'm using fire here as a metaphor for existential transformation. On this side of view of my garden, the garden is represented by grass and potted, fake grass and potted wood dowels painted black, appearing as vestiges of what once were thriving plants. On the opposite side of the structure, which I don't have a slide of, the house appears as a cavity containing a childlike drawing of a house and a drawer filled with arid soil. And randomly and partially embedded into that soil are plastic vials filled with water. Whitewash evokes a feeling of entrapment, I like to think. However, the only door in the structure is slightly ajar, is on the right-hand side, and you can partly see the open door, or the door slightly ajar, suggesting an impending physical and psychological departure from the safety and entrapment implied by the structure. The presence of the suitcase helps further that interpretation. Even though, and I'm going to take some aside from my notes, even though the work is in many ways based on feelings and maybe previous experiences that I've had, which could be construed as personal, I like to work in such a way that there's a narrative implied in the work, but it's like reading a book that doesn't have an ending. So by that, I hope that the viewer picks up on that narrative and comes up with his or her own conclusions. As a matter of fact, I showed this piece at the museum in Atlanta. I can't think of the name of the museum, and in Atlanta, Georgia. And there was one lady in the audience, and when there was a moment there for questions and answers, she raised her hand and she told me that she was very much taken by the piece. She was a Holocaust survivor, and it's the farthest thing from my experience, but to me it was a beautiful revelation that my piece, which had to do with entrapment, had to do with certain personal situations, affected her memory in that fashion. This is a detail of inside the structure. It's a sort of an altar to oneself, to the self. And on the following slide, you can hardly see it, but the piece of luggage has a cutout in the back, and you can see through that slight opening on the door that there's a doll inside the suitcase, as if you're taking your innocence, your childhood with you. Casa, which is in the museum, which is Spanish for my backyard, depicts the past on the side of the sculpture where the crib appears. Growing inside, I don't know if you've seen the piece, but it's here in the show. Growing inside a small house-like structure in the crib is a tree which has only one thin, feeble-looking branch. A red dot at the upper end of the branch implies that it has been cut. Also, the tree's oversized roots are being truncated. The past leads into the present-day kitchen around the corner, so that the viewer crosses a time threshold and enters a hearth of all human matter, the kitchen, a metaphor for existential change and transformation. So if you have a chance to take a look at the piece, that would be great. This photo was taken from a second-story balcony at the Johnson Museum in Ithaca, New York, part of the university there. The structure looks way smaller than it is. It's 15 feet wide, 17 feet long, and is 8.5 feet in height. A metaphor for the human psyche, merely a player consists of the evocation of a living room open like a stage set. It's life-size. And this living room set of sorts serves as the entrance to the installation, so the viewer can actually go through that door, that passage, and enters a labyrinth-like structure inside. With corridors and rooms that contain imagery related to various stages of life, and again, existential change and transformation. Included in the installation is a black and white 16 millimeter film that can be seen through that opening, that small opening, that peephole on that long structure that you see on that wall. In the film, it's a black and white film, 16 millimeters. I was able to get a camera from the Second World War that was lent to me, and I was able to film with that. It was amazing. In the film, there's a long corridor, and a girl crisscrosses the corridor, knocking on doors which never open. That's another view of one of the walls. A small room within the structure where transformation takes place. A door that faces that bed-like structure. And Trappings is one of a number of works where I address issues related to the dark side of human nature. The piece has a central figure lying on a table in a laboratory-like setting. The face is being reconfigured with new pieces of, quote, flesh, which is some material that I made to look like flesh, to mold into a mask. A mask which socially would be considered more proper. In other words, changing this person to make it more proper. Additional pieces of flesh hang on the wall behind the figure, implying future activities of this nature. Also, the figure's true essence is being drained by means of plastic tubing, which you can see partially on the bottom, to be replenished, so draining the true essence of the being, to be replenished later with a more socially acceptable substance. There's a small screen, if I may go back, there's a small screen in front of the face with a peephole in front of the figure that allows only one point of reference, and that is the image of a Madonna and child used as a lure in the cage. After working on this piece, I consider it a very Baroque piece. I mean, there were so many elements and so much detail. And I was then invited to participate in the Lima Biennial, Lima, Peru, where this piece was originally shown. Here, the spiral-shaped labyrinth of Impero sin amo is the title I gave the piece, which is Spanish for without a master. It's defined by the sides of 16 boxes / coffins constructed out of 3/4-inch plywood. The arrangement of these structures, the coffin-like structures, creates corridors for the viewers to walk through. All surfaces inside the boxes are lined with sand, including their false bottoms. And small rectangular openings cut out of the false bottoms reveal partial views of human limbs, which I made out of that cellular clay material, and or faces, clothing, small toys, and personal items. Representing the surface of the water, and that was something that I struggled with. You know, I wanted these not to look just like boxes, but to have an idea, to give an idea of the water somehow. So I stretched strips of clear plastic tightly on the length of each box, and the shimmering effect of the vinyl as it reflects light adds to this effect that, you know, to me worked quite well. So the platforms, going back to the boxes are sand graves. They represent areas of the ocean floor where those who have perished in the sea while in pursuit of freedom lie. The platforms at both ends of the labyrinth imply docks at opposite shores. They can be accessed by the viewer. Vision through the binoculars, though, is blocked. The binoculars resting on the railings is blocked so as to imply that there's some who are impervious to the plight of those who would do the unthinkable in their pursuit of freedom. And this is a view of one of the boxes with the false bottom, everything lined with sand and revealing at the very bottom of the sea a personal item. The title of the piece is a much quoted verse in a poem by Cuban poet Jose Marti, which reads, "Without the fatherland, but without a master." I had the good fortune to visit the Prado Museum in Spain when an exhibition of Francisco Goya's Caprichos was on view. And even though I had seen some of Goya's paintings before, the satirical nature of Los Caprichos resonated with me. As allegory, I understood them also as offering biting commentaries on a variety of contemporary social practices and human behavior. Months after my return home, I toyed with the idea of recreating them in three-dimensional form. So this is one of my favorites. It was, I think, maybe the second one that I carried out in three-dimensional form. It's called "What Ill Will He Die Of?" Obviously making a reference to the doctor, who is represented by a donkey, or which goes by another name. Okay. So I really got into this work, and I created 20 pieces based on the caprichos that I felt would be more appropriately or they could be appropriately carried out in 3D. They were shown in a one-person show in Miami, and I entitled the exhibition Las Goyescas. This is an overall view of the show. The gallery person did a beautiful job, you know, having all of those stands all the same height, you know, the same dimensions, and 20 pieces were there. So since it took about over a year and a half to complete the 20 pieces, I thought it would be appropriate for me to celebrate in some way. So in Party at Goya's, I recreated some of my favorite characters and included 2 new characters representing Francisco Goya and myself engaged in conversation. You'll be able to see me in the next slide, but these are some of the figures that I enjoyed a lot, and some of them I recreated the Capriccio itself, and some of them were just intriguing unto themselves, even though I did not carry them out in the full format of the Capriccio. And you can see in the foreground, there's me with my curly hair talking to Mr. Francisco Goya. And lastly, as of 24/03/07, addresses social and political issues as well as ethical and religious ones. The piece also relates to previous works where I explore the concept of the facade contrasting with the reality of the interior. So in this piece, the viewer first confronts a simple structure, a structure that resembles a shack of sorts, one that can be commonly found, for example, in someone's backyard. Mundane objects present in the porch area outside the structure, such as potted plants and a broom, also help convey this idea. Perhaps the first clue that this structure is not what it appears to be are bright, motion-activated lights that startle the viewers as they come closer to the entry door. And 2 additional motion-activated lights are also present in 2 other corners of the installation. The somber, eerie accumulation of components inside the structure evokes a laboratory-like environment, a place in which life is being created and molded for ulterior motives. So a few objects, especially a notebook with records written on it, and the stool in front of the main work table, give the viewer the impression that this place has been recently and hastily abandoned. And that completes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.